Well, why don't I open it up to questions from the audience at this point, instead of answering all the questions. So who would like to begin?
Do you ever, in the course of being a writer, do you look at, writers in the 30s when they took part in the Spanish Civil War and were activists to a degree that's not quite possible in today's day and age? Do you, in your own work, ever feel that it's not enough to just write and I need to get involved more? Or do you have any thoughts on that at all?
You pick up a gun?
No, not one. Well,
go with Ernest Hemingway and drive it.
Well, that's clearly not going to be possible anymore with the actions that governments have against such activity. But in terms of actually becoming part of, well, to an extent you have gotten involved when you got involved in an organization, but more than just merely writing about it, I shouldn't say merely, but more than just writing about it. And did you feel that writing is enough? So do you ever get carried away with
Chinelo mentioned she'd gotten death threats.
Yeah.
I've gotten death threats, and it's worth remembering that people who are angry about it, there's the power in seeing the invisible and bringing to light communities that have been ignored. There's also the power in the people who wanted them ignored, and so on. So writers are getting killed. In fact, lately with some frequency. I mean, not that any of us are in danger or anything like that, but that's a reminder to me that the writing is actually quite involved. And I think Ernest Hemingway, if you want to use that example, the writing he did, I'm sure he was a terrific ambulance driver, but the writing he did was much more important. And that I guess I think we're in the mix, whether we want to be or not. Chinelo, you can write what you call domestic fiction, and then someone says, well, you have to die for that.
I mean, sometimes I do wish, sometimes I could never do this. I am not a president kind of person, but sometimes I think, you know what? I should be the president of my country because I can, my organizational skills are great and I can manage things very precisely and I can take care of this and make it better, But that's in a dream world because I mean, to be any kind of a political leader involves way more than I could ever know. But it's just that desire to fix things. It's there, but realistically, I can't, I would probably go crazy for one thing because it's just so much for, me anyway to handle. I wouldn't know where to start with these, any situation in terms of what's going on with any government has a long history, a lot of which I just don't even feel informed enough to know where to even start, what would be the best, most logical beginning to fixing anything. So, but I have that desire to fix things a lot. And, but all I feel empowered to do and do well enough right now is my writing. That being said, I'm not actually trying to be president of anything, just to be clear. But, I've thought so many times how to fix things. If I were to run my country, how would I fix it? And I'm also an American, so that's also my country. But I mean Nigeria, my first country.
Okay.
Please go ahead. Following on that, I wonder whether you'd like to comment on writing about social conflicts and being a social advocate. I mean, would you want to go set up an organization and do social advocacy? Or do you feel that what you say, you're only empowered to be a writer, to be writing about it, meaning your text is then the campaign? I wonder whether you'd like to comment on that. What impact would you think you could extend beyond that novel to an organization that would do social advocacy on any topic or issue?
I mean, it's a good idea. It's one, like I said, I've thought of, but I don't know, I'm not right now at a place where I can logically think. I mean, I've thought many times about, even my mother and I have very lengthy conversations about going back to Nigeria, opening up orphanages that are linked with schools, but there's so much more involved, like funding, how to get, like, we're not business people, and we'd have to have connections with, like, banks and, like, all these, you know, lenders and big sponsors that it's just more than I'm literature, like, my brain is wired that way, and all those other things just become, like, I need to hire an entire team to help me do it, you know? And so right now, it really is what you said, the book is the campaign for now, and when I get better and climb higher and figure out things and know what I'm doing, because you also don't want to jump into something and make a mess of something that could have been good, you know? And so right now, yeah, the book is the campaign.
Yeah. And I think also you have to know, I think with time you realize your own limitations in the world. It's not only every single one of us. And you also realize where is it that you can, and everything takes time. I mean, a book can take 10 years to write, 3 years. And you have to know, it takes a village to change a world. It's just, we are part of that agency as agents of change via writing. And this is the role that we're playing, and then someone else is playing another role. I think that's sort of how to, and all of us are part of it. I'm always, I think sometimes even when we're looking at the news, we say, oh, we listen to it and we speak about, oh, this is happening in the Middle East, this is happening in Asia, this is happening, yes, this is but we're all connected. And I think sometimes we forget that if, you know, there's a destruction, and whether it's environmental or political in one part of the world, it's still affecting us. But I think we often forget because it's not just right in front of us, so we're not having that immediate conversation that someone else would be having, like during the Iraq War, the Afghanistan War. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's true that we're good writers, but not necessarily good advocates outside of that. I mean, I know in my own case, I was involved with, I wrote a book about a threatened rainforest, a tribal group within that threatened rainforest in the Philippines, and I was asked after the book to join the group is called the Tasadai, and I was asked to join this Friends of the Tasadai group, and I found myself unwittingly and unwillingly being the sort of last person standing in this group, and I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. It just seems intractable, this problem, and they're getting roads built through their rainforest, and it's just awful, you know, but I could only write the book. You know, I couldn't, and it's not even my country, you know, and so I think one thing I'd just like to point out is that sometimes, whether we want or not, we become involved in the issue, and we become involved in people's lives. They stay with us because they are people, and we don't just necessarily, I mean, sometimes we write about someone and that's it, but often we write about someone and we're all of a sudden, they're part of our lives, I think. You know, like with the Baldocs and with the people that you're talking about, certainly with the people that, you know. So, yeah, but I think that's very true that the advocacy that we do best is probably within our own work.
No, I was just going to say, it's really powerful. I've been reminded, I spoke the other day about Beidao, and, you know, in China, and all these group of writers who, they're in exile. You know, they're still in exile today. They still have not gone back to China. I mean, there's so many writers in exile, because the power of the word to change the mind of others, to eradicate this invisibility, to actually speak out and tell these stories and give the people this strength to speak out, to go into the streets. It's a very powerful thing, and politicians know it. And I think that's how you participate in that sort of other level that I think you were trying to get at.
Yeah.
I think there's also a matter of just keeping faith or being loyal to the story, and whether it's nonfiction or fiction or poetry, that it is going to make you a terrible advocate. Because advocacy work, with great admiration for advocacy work, it is about strategy. What is going to, you know what, it may not be the best thing to address the whole complexity of the issue. In that Uganda case, an international group tried to get me involved was pressing an international crimes against humanity case against a particular American who had had a very small role in Uganda. And they wanted, because he was a very garish and cartoonish character, they wanted to make him the main villain. But he's not. And I understand the strategy. I understand why they're doing it. Personally, I hope it's effective in drawing attention to it. But I have to stay with that story. And that's as true as facts, I think, for fiction. If you start thinking, well, if you started skills and said, well, how can I sort of convey a message that will put Nigeria on the right course? It's so dangerous, and you see writers do it, and it's sort of the end of them, and the end of any value that they brought to thinking about those ideas.
Do what?
Sometimes sort of aligning their work with strategy. And in terms of the 1930s, for instance, any number of writers decided that they had to align their work with strategy, the strategy of a common cultural front of the left, and it often didn't work.
Well, that's true. I mean, I think that there's a certain corollary to this, which is the sort of overtly political writing, say anti-Vietnam poetry, for instance, with writers like Denise Levertov and writers like that who wrote poetry against the Vietnam War, and it hasn't really transcended that war. That kind of, I don't think.
Although Wilfred Owen,
Wilfred Owen, yes,
right. But he wasn't saying this is the best way to stop World War I.
Exactly.
Like, this is what I see.
Yeah, yeah. But someone who was writing protest poetry as opposed to Karen, you.
Yeah, I mean, we talked a lot about influence and affecting the world and activism and all of this, but then Professor Handal mentioned two kinds of writers, and I was wondering, also in the introduction to the American Writers thing, there was some talk about writing being a private kind of art form, and I was wondering if any of you, if all of you couldn't bring your work into the public sphere for whatever reason, would you still write it? Or conversely, are there some things you just want to write for yourself, and you think it's selfish in any way to do that?
I don't think it's selfish at all to write for yourself. And I mean, when I first started writing, I always wrote, but not with the idea of getting published at all. And I would have still written. When I went to Iowa, I didn't really believe that I would ever be published. It was just by accident, but I had written those stories anyway. At some point, maybe that will happen, but I think, it's good to write for yourself, and if it's political, that can be good too, but it doesn't have to be. When I first started getting published, and people would ask me, "Oh, are you a political writer?" and I would say no, because I'm not. I never considered myself a political writer at all. I thought, "Oh, I'm not interested in politics at all," but then I realized actually I am. I had to learn that I was, because at one job interview, some professor said to me, he was the one who said, "Are you a political writer?" And I said, "No," and he was like, "Huh?" And I tried to explain to him, I said, well, there's a difference between what I write and who I am. I'm not a political person. My writing just happens to be political. But then I realized, actually, I'm very much interested in the politics around me. I am a political person, but I just, my idea was never to publish anything like, change the world. These things were bothering me, and I just wrote stories about them, and it ended up being published. Now, if you are a writer who wants to, get it out there for political reasons, that's also fine, but I just think that, both can exist and exist fine and happily.
Anyone else want to add to that?
One can argue everything's political anyways. Even love is political.
Other questions? Anyone else?
So conflicts will invoke a lot of negative emotions like sadness or anger, and for a reader, you just read it once and you really feel so strongly about it. So I noticed that when you write it, you actually experience and you see all these conflicts happening. So after seeing it and experiencing it for so many years, how do you cope emotionally, in the sense that you don't become too emotionally involved, or in the opposite end, you become desensitized to it? So how do you balance that?
Writers don't tend to balance that very well.
I was gonna say, yeah, fail, epic fail.
Scotch.
I think it's interesting, there's like this weird cycle. I always get way emotionally invested in whatever I'm writing about, probably inappropriately. It's back to that obsessive psychology, where I become very obsessive about it, and I think, in all honesty, I used to feel very sort of embarrassed about this as a writer, like I felt like it was a weakness, but I think that I have a real sort of emotional intelligence, and I have a really deep empathy, and I think that's one of the things like I have, like that now I'm starting to realize like that's something that's sort of mine as a writer that gives me access to places and to people that maybe aren't immediately available to others. And so, but the downside of that then of course is that I sort of have terrible boundary issues in terms of taking in a lot of that. And will have, like, you know, in the moment, like I can be a professional and sort of hold that together and maintain a distance. And then it will just kind of come crashing down on me at a certain point. I remember, and this is back when I was being a reporter. Jeff and I were talking earlier today about when I was a police reporter for 3 years. And you know, you're definitely supposed to be very detached and tough and handle everything. And I was compartmentalizing it. I was doing it. You know, I could sit through these terrible court cases where people talked about horrific abuse of children, and I could write it all down, and I could go file my story. And then I'd be driving home, and I'd look down, and I'm going like 85, 90 miles an hour on the freeway. And then I go home, and I get out of and the radio's blaring. That's the other thing. I notice like I've got the radio on at like top volume. How long has that been happening? And then I go home, and it's not like 2 glasses of wine won't work, you know? 3 glasses of wine won't work. Like trouble sleeping, you know, I mean, those things, they do have an effect. And then though, what's weird is like, then you can pass over into a period of sort of numbness, where you do start to feel sort of numb to everything, which is also sort of strange too, where you can sort of see yourself almost from the outside dealing with this very horrific material, and yet you're not really reacting to it. You know, and you sort of register yourself and you think, why am I not, you know, completely outraged by this? How am I somehow able to detach myself and go through these stacks of documents, you know, that are outlining terrible crimes? But again, I think taking it all full circle and taking it through this cycle, I just think again that emotional, like being able to access that stuff emotionally is what brings great power to a lot of writing and to a lot of work, and that ability to feel deeply about what you're writing about. So I've learned other things, I will say. So it's a happy story. Please don't worry about me. You know, it's things like as I've gotten older, like I have to make sure I run a lot. Like I really do. Like I run really hard and pretty obsessively, and that's a way sort of I get out of my head and get away from that stuff. I have gotten a little bit better at distancing. So.
I think also, you know, you mentioned negative emotions, and this is maybe just to echo that a little bit, but to let yourself really feel that sorrow and anger, not just on the page, but outside that. And I think especially the anger, I think we know how to feel sorrow. But that piece I read the other day, the short piece with this very homophobic man with a gun, and most of that story was about the people who were living in fear of that gun. And as I wrote it, I mean, I just come from spending a lot of time with those people, and then I'm listening to them, and I would get very upset and crying and feeling sorrow and so on. But I'd also get angry, and you know, and that anger, that's legitimate. There's ways in which I think there's the good manners of everyday life in which we do try to avoid anger. Anger is not useful in everyday life. But if you're going to go and encounter the full range of emotions, including all the ugly ones, don't hide from them. I don't think writers should be virtuous people in that sense. Writers should not be saints. If they are, they'll explode. They'll pop.
Any other questions?
I have one more. If
Sure.
It's more a technical question in terms of the actual craft of writing. Do you sort of allocate a certain number of hours that you spend getting the entire picture, taking notes, or is it just sort of rule of thumb where you feel, all right, at this stage I've got enough perspective, I've researched enough, and is it just a feeling, or do you actually say, no, I need to spend X number of hours and say, all right, now I think this is enough work and this is when I start the actual part of writing, or is it just you just write as you go along and eventually come up with sort of...
So, I mean, there's two ways, of course, in which that can happen.
Yeah.
So there's sort of the ideal way, which I'll get to in a minute. I mean, there's this sort of the reality most of the time, which is, say, if you've got a deadline,
Yeah.
right? For example, if you get a magazine assignment, you might already have it very bordered for you in terms of how much time you might have. So then very quickly you have to do sort of a panicked triage.
Yeah.
Okay, I've got a deadline of, 10 days from now. Okay, I've got this long that I can, spend out in the field doing this and this and this. And at some point, sometimes it's almost like the timer goes off and you're done.
Yeah.
Like you sort of have to pull out before maybe you're even really ready.
Yeah.
But over time, as you get better at it, you kind of learn very quickly how to utilize that time and where to go so that you don't run into a whole lot of dead ends. So unfortunately, it sometimes is called for you. Now that said, I mean, the ideal or the type of work that Jeff loves to do, that I like to do, Robin has written about it as well, as like immersion work, where you ideally spend a kind of open-ended amount of time with something as much as possible. And in that case, I will just talk about my method for a second, and that's totally different perhaps from other people's method. But like what I will like to do is not a ton of background research ahead of time, but as much as I can, or sort of preliminary interviews if I can even do them on the phone, that would get me like biographical information or details, so then I kind of do that sort of pre-work. And then when I have time to be on the ground somewhere, I'm really maximizing moments where I'm placing myself in unfolding action in things that are happening, so that I'm not doing a lot of talking to somebody behind a desk, if I can help it, and I'm really trying to use my time in that way. My impulse personally is always to get way more than I need, because I'm a super pessimistic reporter. I'm like Eeyore from Winnie the Pooh, where like my editor will be like, how's it going? And never mind that I just like scored like 20 amazing interviews, and like on this last assignment I was just on, I went ginseng hunting in the woods of rural Appalachia and found like these huge, massive ginsengs and saw a copperhead snake, and it was like actually this totally incredible day. But at the end of it, I was like, I have nothing. I'm never gonna be able to write this, So the part of that is then I'll just keep reporting until it's like I just have too much, and in my mind I can feel it. I know I have too much, and things are starting to kind of repeat themselves almost. And that's when I usually have to like stage an intervention on myself and say, you're done. Like you're done. You got to go back. The other thing that you forget, or after so many years, Jeff probably doesn't, and I do, is like you can always go back to people, right? You can like call them up, or you can, but at the time I get so obsessed, like this is all I have, and once I leave, everything will vanish and disappear, and like I'm lost. So that's me. You probably have a way more sane way of approaching this.
No, the only sanity is, and there are writers who are disciplined. Maybe some of you will say, yes, it's easy. You just get up and you punch the clock at 9 and you write until noon, take a break. And there are writers who do that and are wonderful. And if you're one of them, that's good news. And if you're not, I think a lot of young writers and would-be writers spend a lot of time chastising themselves for not being that kind of person. And it's a waste, and you're not going to become that person. You're not going to find that discipline. That discipline will come naturally to you if that's your discipline. If, on the other hand, you write by exhausting all other distractions, by going for a long run, which is a distraction, it's a healthy distraction, God forbid by drinking too much or something like that. There's a reason a lot of writers drink. That's an unhealthy way. But there's all these things. if that's your way, you should actually be hard on yourself. But anything else, be forgiving. Be forgiving. It's not, you're not writing to get fit. You're writing to make a story, however you get there.
Great. Well, I think on that note, we'll say that this has come to a close, and so join me in thanking our